Thank you. Thanks. Hey, y'all. Hey, y'all. We Jews are a revolutionary people. It's time we started acting like it. Jewish history is interwoven with histories of class, cultural, and national revolutions around the world. For generations, our safety and thriving, our futures have been intimately interwoven with the futures of the people around us. But that's not the story that we tell over and over. That's not the story we pass down to our children. That's not the story I was taught. That story goes something more like this. We have always been persecuted. We've always been alone. No one's ever had our backs. We have always been betrayed by our neighbors. We can trust no one. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's been true some of the time. That's part of our history. I'd like for us to start telling the other part. The parts in which we lived in relatively similar safety or precariousness alongside our neighbors. The stories in which we struggled arm in arm with our neighbors for the increased well-being of all of us. And even the stories in which our neighbors showed up and protected us as Jews. I want for us to tell those parts with the same fervor and intention and demand that we tell the story of our isolation and our victimization. Why? Is it because I don't actually want to face the devastation that's been in our history? Is it because I don't think that there's lessons to be learned from our persecution? Or maybe it's because I'm so comfortable now as an assimilated Jew with white access here in the United States that I don't think this history is pertinent. Is there a part of me that actually wishes to forget about the millions of Jews who have been killed? No, I do not. I am committed to remembering. Every day I remember. I wake up and I pray near a few photos. One is of my great-grandmother, Esther Litovitz. She was put into a mental institution midway through her life here in New York for having a mental break and reliving the pogroms of her childhood, screaming nightly, "The Cossacks are coming, the Cossacks are coming, hide the children." The other is of her cousin, my first cousin, 3 times removed, Zivia Lubetkin, the female commander of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. A woman who fought a brutal battle for the dignity of our people. I am rooted in this history, but I am looking towards the future. A future in which we as Jews take up our rightful place in the movement for the liberation of all people. But I get stuck when I try to envision that. And part of why I get stuck is that I'm filled with feelings of fear and isolation. See, the impact of those traumas is that many of us in the Jewish community are filled with feelings of terror, feeling walled off, feeling isolated, even if we're not conscious of it. For some of us, that can look like keeping our passports updated always for that moment when we're going to have to run. Or for some of us, it looks like burying money in the backyard for the moment when we're not going to be able to access our bank accounts anymore. For some of us, it means that our close friends and confidants are only other Jews. Or for some of us, it means that when we're giving tzedakah and we're making donations to Jewish organizations, we do so not just out of the love and care for our people, but with a feeling that we have to take care of each other because no one else will care about us. So that kind of fear and feeling of isolation is what happens to a community that undergoes a kind of cyclical violence. And it's not our fault. Just like it's not the fault of any community targeted by violence to carry the impact of that violence with them generation to generation. We are no exception. But what do we do with that trauma? So, in many ways, we as a Jewish community rehearse our trauma. In the Haggadah, we're taught that we should tell the story of Exodus not as if they were slaves in the land of Egypt, but as if we were slaves in the land of Egypt. And that is for our education every year so that we can step into a kind of responsibility. But it feels sometimes like we've taken that directive to be about every story of every attack. And we tell these stories over and over, well past the point of education, to the point in which we are re-traumatizing our children. I have heard so many stories from Jewish summer camps or day schools or Sunday schools where the violence of our people's history was performed for young people through graphic films or even reenactment programs that left these young people devastated. Sometimes it feels like the way that we talk and teach about our history leaves no possibility for a different future. We say never forget, but it sounds almost like we're saying forget everything else. This persecution is the entirety of what it means to be us and what it will always mean. And from that place, we are left alone, walled off, and poised with bulletproof glass all around us and weapons in hand. And even if your vision for the future is a Jewish community armed to the teeth with tanks and guns, we are still left terrified, walled off, and isolated. This is not the future I want for us. This isn't the future I want for me or the next generation or the generations after that. This isn't the future our ancestors wanted for us. So how do we change it? We need allies. Anti-Semitism is not going to end simply through the strengthening of the Jewish people. We need trusted allies at our side. But we're not going to be able to live into those relationships of allyship and solidarity if our history tells us that it's impossible. And we're not going to be able to build those kind of lasting, trusting relationships we need if we're told that betrayal is around every corner. So we need to tell the stories of the allies we've had to create enough room to see the allies that are right in front of us and to make space for the allies that are coming our way. This is why I want us to tell the other parts of our history, the stories of solidarity, mutual thriving. These stories aren't any less true than the stories of our persecution, and they can offer us a path forward. So what are some of those stories? What are stories when non-Jews have shown up in protection of their Jewish neighbors? Here's a couple stories. 2 years ago, I traveled to Eastern Europe, and I was able to go to some of the places that my family is from. And my great-grandfather is from a very small town near the city of Chernovitz in Ukraine, what was then Romania. And during World War II, the mayor of Chernovitz refused the orders of the state and the occupying army, refusing to send any Jews into a ghetto or put them on trains to the camps. And the speeches that he made during this time are beautiful, and they speak to the humanity of all people. When it came down to the final reckoning, he said that he needed the Jews of his city for the economic survival of the city. How many Jews do you need? The authorities asked. All 20,000 of them, he replied. And that is how almost 20,000 Jews were saved in Chernovitz during the Holocaust. Another story of that same time, the head of the Islamic Center of France provided forged identity papers for over 1,000 Jews to leave and get to safety. And during that time, he hid Jewish families inside the Paris mosque. More recent examples, just last summer in the racist, anti-Semitic, and ultimately lethal ingathering of white supremacists and white nationalists in Charlottesville, Virginia, a synagogue in Charlottesville requested police presence, a request that was not met. But non-Jewish allies showed up and stood guard in the front door while congregants exited safely out the back. And also in this last year, when Jewish cemeteries were desecrated, Muslim leaders and organizations were first responders, providing material aid and manual labor to rebuild. That outpouring from Muslim and other non-Jewish communities was inspiring. So, what happens for you when you hear these stories? I'll tell you what happens for me. Something softens. My shoulders come down a little. My jaw unlocks a little bit. I can take in a little bit more oxygen. There's just a little bit more room. There's a little bit more safety for me in the world. And from this place, I'm more resilient. I can just a little bit more easily envision that future that I long for, of Jews taking up our rightful place in the movements for the liberation of all people. I can see our solidarity with other people, and I can see their solidarity with us. I can envision trusting someone with my safety and the safety of my people. What if we had these stories with us at our backs every time we entered into a relationship? Every time we entered into a room? Every time we entered into multiracial coalition space? You know, what would be different for us if we could show up assuming that everyone was there to be our trusted ally? What kind of abundance would that mean for us? And what kind of real, genuine support could we extend if we felt that supported? This takes practice. We are going to have to start giving and receiving crucial mutual support. And I have to be honest, many of us in the Jewish community aren't very good at it, giving or receiving that support. It's because we're not practiced in it, and everything takes practice. Right now, our community is practiced in building walls, putting up more bulletproof glass, and unfortunately, sidling up to people in power, all with the hopes of safety. In the United States right now, this looks like sidling up to white supremacists and right-wing extremists in government, all under the guise of safety. Or for those of us who are white, trying to disappear in some way into our white access to power, wealth, security. But what we know is that that doesn't ultimately make us safe, and it puts others at grave harm. So we get to practice something different. We get to practice extending and receiving mutual support in ways that keep all communities safe. And it's going to take a lot of practice. They say that it takes 300 repetitions before you can do something in a way that feels natural. And that it takes 3,000 repetitions before you can do it under pressure. So we have to start practicing. Because something that our community practices is that we're so afraid of betrayal that we show up, particularly in coalition spaces, with a list of demands or litmus tests for other people to meet, for us to work with them. And by doing that, we're ultimately setting up a situation for those potential allies to not be able to meet those demands, and then we walk away from the table. So it's sadly ironic to me that a community that is so afraid of being betrayed will create these conditions for us to walk away. And it is devastating when I reflect on the fact that communities that are being more directly targeted at this time do not have the luxury of walking away. We have done our share of walking. There have been countless moments when the Jewish community has failed to show up for Black and brown communities, indigenous communities, immigrant communities, Muslim communities, and trans communities. And an infinite number of times when we as white or cisgender or American Jews have failed to show up for immigrant Jews, Jews of color, or trans Jews in our synagogues, communities, organizations. But they're still at the table. I want to share a story. A colleague of mine, Yehuda Webster, who is a Jew of color who's in leadership of 3 different Jewish organizations. And he, on a panel once, said that if every time he experienced racism in the Jewish community, he left, he would never be part of a Jewish community again. Those of us who have walked need to walk humbly back. And this time, what if we said, we're not going anywhere? What if we just flat out said, our futures, our safety, and our thriving are intimately intertwined, and we're not going anywhere, even when our conflicts feel impossible? Because solidarity is not easy. It is difficult. It is trying. It is facing disappointments in each other over and over again, and reaching for each other over and over again. It's not walking away. What if we were able to have each other's backs even through deep conflict? What could we crack open? These are not rhetorical questions. The rise in power and reach and growth of white supremacist and white nationalist organizations and movements in this country at this time is putting all of our communities at greater risk. We need to start practicing something different today. So let's practice. Let's practice extending and receiving crucial mutual support. Let's practice recognizing when people show up for us. Let's practice honoring the alliances we have and those we're going to make. Let's remember to tell the rest of our history to create the possibility for a different future. Let's take up our role, our rightful place in the movements for the liberation of all people. And let us be a revolutionary people again. Thank you.